Okay, hi. I'm on 8 Lambda Lane with Jeff Schaefer. And Jeff, I want to thank you because you filled out a survey form on the SFA website.
Yep.
And most people who get a repair don't bother to go fill out a form, unless probably they were really ticked off or something. But in your case, everything was okay, but I wanted to review it so that everybody else would know what happened in your case. So why don't you just briefly explain it to us?
So this pump was put in 2011 when we had the sewer system attached to the sewer system here.
Yes?
And on December 7th of 2020,
Yeah.
the alarm went off. It was actually like 10 o'clock at night. So
Okay.
I didn't do anything till the next morning.
Good.
The alarm had stopped sounding by then, but as soon as we started using water again, it came back on. So I called Weston and Sampson,
Okay.
left a message. They were here within an hour.
Good.
The repairman said, "Yeah, it's probably at the end of life, and we'll just replace it."
So at that point, it was probably like it was like 9 years old plus, right?
Yeah. 9
Okay.
years old. Yeah.
So the mean time between failure is supposed to be about 8 years. So you did that's about normal.
Seems right. Yep.
Okay, great. Then what happened?
So they replaced it. No charge. No discussion about being charged for it at all. They left. Everything was fine for about a month and a half till I think it was January 31st,
Yeah.
which was a Sunday actually,
Okay.
and the alarm went off again. So I promptly called Weston and Sampson, left another message, and once again, within about an hour, somebody showed up.
Yeah.
The repairman then said, well, it might be because it was a rebuilt pump that it failed so early.
And did he explain why he would say that, or
No, he just said,
what did you take that to mean?
I took it to mean that they rebuild pumps and occasionally they don't last very long.
Okay, right. So a new pump, when it comes from the factory, should be, go through a series of tests. And those tests could be more complete than what might happen to a pump that is rebuilt.
Yeah, okay.
So in particular, at the factory, they will test a pump for water tightness by actually putting compressed air into it and seeing if it bubbles out any of the gaskets. Now, this type of equipment is probably not something they really have where they rebuild it, because they rebuild it at a shed down at Southwell Field. So it doesn't
go back to the factory.
No, it doesn't go back to the factory. So it's not as controlled an environment, and that might be what he's talking about. But the reason that it caught my eye is, of course, because you wouldn't expect it. If you had bought that, for example, on your own dime, you wouldn't really like the fact that it stopped working in,
of course I would expect it to be
in 7 weeks.
Fully operational.
Now, you didn't get charged for that.
Nope. So again, the second time they came out, this time they were out quickly and said that they would replace it with a brand new pump.
Right.
He didn't have the pump on him, so I guess he made a phone call with somebody, and he had to wait here for an hour or two.
Okay.
And then somebody else arrived with the pump. They put it in, and again, no discussion about being charged or anything like that. And
Yeah.
since then, everything's been fine.
Right. Now, in the Markham case, it turned out that his pump was about less than 2 months old. It's quite similar to yours. And the town actually kind of used that as evidence that they must have done something wrong, because the pump had just been rebuilt versus a pump, let's say, that was 9 years old. But I think this example shows that you really can't take anything from that. The fact that it was rebuilt or not doesn't really mean anything, because some rebuilt pumps might fail. Now, one reason why a pump might fail is because of the water tightness, because the control cavity where the electronics is in one of these pumps is very frequently underneath the water level. And that's a different design from this pump than from some other grinder pumps. And it does make this design somewhat susceptible to water. So in the normal operation of a pump, the normal operating range, according to these arrows, for example, goes from here to here. But when the pump stops working, the water will rise up. When you hear your alarm go off, for example, that water is so high that it's actually higher than 2 gaskets in the pump. One of them is the One of them is the top housing gasket, which is right about there. That's very close to the alarm level, but when it's over the alarm level, it's on top of that. And the other one are the O-ring seals. Now, when the pump is rebuilt, those are essentially it's open. So those seals aren't typically replaced in a rebuild, because I've seen the list of materials on a rebuild, and they don't typically replace those.
So the seals are still 9 years old, or
Yeah, and the debris might fall on that seal as they open it before they reseal it, or the seal itself might just be getting old. And it's hard to say. If you replace something in your car and you look at the instructions, very often it will say, oh, always put in a new gasket, okay? But people don't always put in a new gasket because they look at the old gasket and it looks fine. And many times it is. But that's just an example of water. Now, water can get higher than the alarm level for a number of reasons. The most important reason is during a power outage. During a power outage, the pump stops working, so almost always, and the alarm usually won't run either because there's no power, okay? And almost always the water level, even if you don't have a backup in your house, the water level will get high enough so that the alarm would go off. So, for example, when the power is returned, it's very, very common for the alarm to immediately go off. Okay, so during power outages, that's a particularly susceptible time where a pump that does have a compromised gasket might get water intrusion. Another example is, in some households, they can use enough water in a short period of time. Like I have a guy that he has a large tub, like a 50-gallon. Yeah. You might call it a hot tub, but it's actually inside his house. If he drains that out to refresh the water, his alarm will go off every time.
He's filling it so fast.
Now, he doesn't get a backup. It's just that it can't keep up. It can deliver water into that pump at a rate faster than it can pump out. So the level in the wet well will rise under those conditions. Just last week, I was driving by a house and the alarm went off. And I talked to the homeowner and they just said their daughter was home doing laundry. So if someone's doing laundry and maybe someone's taking a shower at the same time, it is possible sometimes to get more water going into the pump than out in the short term. That usually doesn't persist. Like a washing machine when it's draining, it has a limited number of gallons. Yeah. So that won't cause a backup, but it could cause the alarm to go off. And that's a sign that that pump might now be compromised. While I'm here, I wanted to check on a few other things on your pump. So one of the things that I've been checking on, sorry about the camera here, let me see, is these fasteners, okay? So I like to check fasteners because sometimes if there's a fastener that's broken or stripped, I have a guy that they claimed he damaged it, even though he knows that it was the serviceman who damaged it on a previous trip because he was actually present when it happened. But I notice here, for example, this fastener there's a crack in the cover because probably this fastener is on a little bit too tight. Did you notice that?
I did not.
Well, that shouldn't really cause a problem, but it could over time. Eventually, water could get in there. Now, that's the type of thing where it is useful sometimes. This pump, see, the ground, it's the ground burial depth. This is up high enough so that it has to be. It's okay for it to be a little bit higher than that, but when it's a little bit lower than that, there's a problem because if there's an overflow, it might back up. This, I would say, is fine. Now, you might say that even maybe a little bit more earth should be here because the electrical cable comes up in here and you don't want that to get compromised by gardening, okay? A little bit more earth will protect it. But in this case, since you can't see the cable, it is underground, I would say that looks fine. Another thing that we've had trouble with in various times is the so-called red zip tie. Now, I noticed there's no red zip tie on your alarm panel. Was there ever a red zip tie on the alarm panel as far as you know?
I think there was.
And do you have any idea what might have happened to it?
When they came out both times to repair it, they opened that box. So.
Yes, and if they, for example, happened to run out of red zip ties, they might not put another red zip tie on there. And now what that means is two things. One of them is your alarm. The red zip tie only provides what I would call a moderate amount of protection, okay? Because anyone who wanted to get in obviously could cut it. But someone wouldn't accidentally, such as a small child or even other people, wouldn't tend to accidentally open it up if there was a zip tie on it. And we have another customer who had a problem where what happened was he had a backup of water, and when they came to look at it, what they discovered was that the circuit breakers in his box were in the off position, and there was no zip tie on the box. They accused him of having gone into his box and turned off the breakers. Now, because the red zip tie was there, he couldn't defend himself as strongly as he could have been if the zip tie was there and the breakers were off. For example, that would imply that the service person, when they were there, forgot to turn them back on again, and that can also happen. So anyway, I'm going to leave you with a red zip tie.
Okay.
Okay, so I would say just put it on there,
Sure.
and that way you just know that if it's there, you haven't been in the box.
Yep.
No one in your family has accidentally gone into the box or intentionally, and also no one in the neighborhood has just wandered by. Here's a place where it could happen. The alarm, let's say the alarm went off and you're not home, and that can happen too. And a neighbor comes by, they think, oh, the alarm's going off, something's wrong. They think they're doing a good thing, and they might want to turn it off. And they might, just by looking around, they might open the box and turn off the circuit breakers. Now, you might say people, wouldn't do that, but it could happen. The alarm would go off, then they forgot, they didn't necessarily intend to leave it that way, because when an alarm goes off like this, it could run for all night long.
Yeah.
Okay? Okay. They might forget about it, or something else could happen. So we have cases of that where people will come home and the breakers are off, and then they have a backup. Now, when you get a backup, someone has to pay to have that pumped out, because very often, sometimes that water won't drain down, it'll back up. Anyway, the zip tie is a good idea. Not everyone has it, but it is something that you could conceivably get charged for, even though you shouldn't ever have to. Okay, great. Jeff, thank you very much. It went on a little bit long,
No problem.
but I just wanted to cover whatever cases I found at your location. Okay, thanks.